The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, 3 times he's tried to get up and move this motion. Three times he's prepared on.
Order. Order.
And Mr Speaker,
Prime Minister will be heard.
There was not even a flicker of political life in it. There's not a flicker of political life in it. Mr Speaker, my great fear is he'll die in the straight on me. If I stretch him out till May, he'll die on the straight on me. Because if this is the best he can do, I've only had to make him run February to the end of the year. And God, you know, he was up the front of the field and he's dropping back, you know, as you can see the line coming up. I mean, if that's a censure motion of a fighting opposition leader in the last days as he sees it of this parliament, well, God help you all over there. God help you all over there. Mr Speaker.
Order.
Mr Speaker, and just to reveal, Mr Speaker, the fact that he has not a clue about where we are now in the world or what we're doing, he thought putting together the largest free trade area in the world had me stranded in Japan. That is, in one of the greatest post-war initiatives of Australian foreign policy.
Order. The House will come to order.
Stitching together a Pacific Rim trading community where we're stranded in Japan. Stranded in Japan. Mr Speaker, I want to move the following motion, speak to it. That all words after that be omitted and the following words inserted. That the Leader of the Opposition be censured for his failure to stand for any consistent policy, principle or issue of substance before the Australian people.
Order.
For his failure to imbue the federal coalition with any standards of integrity and responsibility in policy development.
Order. No, the Prime Minister will be heard. Those on my left. Leader of the Opposition was heard.
For his failure to imbue the federal coalition with any standards of integrity and responsibility in policy development. For his refusal to engage the Australian people in serious debate on matters of policy importance. And his preference for political stunts, empty headland speeches and smears over policy rigour and substance. Mr Speaker, it came to all this week when the paper which has supported him most finally said, "Howard ducks a hard decision." And the Financial Review, in a long editorial, Howard ducks a hard decision. And why did they say it, Mr Speaker? That on the basic issue of management, he said in his speech at Competitive Australia on the 18th of July, "We will make significant public savings. The overriding objective of our fiscal policy will be achieved over the economic cycle, a structural budget surplus, so that rather than contributing to debt creation, the government will be adding to the national savings pool."
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, he made clear that he stands for a structural budget surplus. But when asked this week, on one of the rare times he's been questioned on television, when the compere, Mr Cassidy, said it sounds as though it won't be on big program spent items, the government seems to be gleefully awaiting announcements of savage budget cuts into programs. That isn't going to happen. I think there's a lot of things the government is gleefully awaiting that aren't going to happen. And he kept backing away from that point onwards, Mr Speaker. Then he got asked...
Order.
Yeah, OK, we'll get to it.
Order. The member for Gippsland and the Deputy
Leader. He got asked
Leader.
him repeatedly at a press conference about whether will you still commit yourself to a structural surplus after accounting for asset flows? Well, I haven't seen the starting point, he said. Then he got repeatedly asked the question, and then finally he said, the questioner said, but you talked about substantial public savings in the past. In July you mentioned substantial public savings. Let me say again, our commitment is that if we promise to spend money or forego revenue, we will say where the money's coming from. I have never said that we are going further than that. In other words, Mr Speaker, a complete denial of the fact that he intends to get a budget surplus, that he intends on using cuts in program spendings to get it. In fact, Mr Speaker, at the end of this year, after a year back as Leader of the Opposition on fiscal policy, he stands for nothing. Exactly. Nothing. Nothing. Nothing whatsoever. Mr Speaker, then he says, Mr Speaker, that he falls back to this question. He falls back to this stuff about overlap with the public sector between the Commonwealth and the states. And, Mr Speaker, I'll just tell him that the Department of Finance's assessment is that the total cost of administrative specific purpose payment savings is around 60 million or 0.33% of the total value of specific purpose payments. So in other words, Mr Speaker, by getting rid of the so-called overlap and duplication and administrative efficiencies, he's going to save 60 million. He's only got the balance of 11 billion to go to meet his deputy's target. A balance of 11 billion to go, Mr Speaker. Now, Mr Speaker, he's not going to, he said, change tax rates. He's not going to put up tax.
Order.
Mr Speaker.
Order.
Then he says, but he's not going to make big spending cuts. In other words, Mr Speaker, he's made himself so small a target, he stands for nothing at all. He stands for nothing whatsoever in terms of the modern management of the Australian economy. Nothing whatsoever. Then take industrial relations, Mr Speaker. He mentioned this in his address. Take industrial relations. He said on so many occasions, I would like to see throughout Australia an industrial relations system that's largely similar to what the coalition government has implemented in Western Australia. I supported the IR laws that have already been enacted in Western Australia. Then he said earlier, in 92, I feel very comfortable with IR Minister Good's policy. I think it's an excellent policy. We've had a lot of discussions before it came out. Give or take a comma here or there, the coalition's policy was the same as Victoria's, he said, at the National Press Club. The main thrust of Victorian legislation is on all fours with our approach. And after, of course, they introduced their policy, 400,000 Victorian workers transferred to the federal system. Mr Speaker, I've always been a passionate advocate of workplace contracts, he says. Then he said, our proposals are not a mirror image of the New Zealand proposals, but they're in the same category. They are of the same type. Now, Mr Speaker, this is the Leader of the Opposition who believes in radical labour market reform. This is the Leader of the Opposition who believes in no flexibility downwards, who believes in contracts without the Commission, who believes in bargaining without a no disadvantage test, who believes and is on the record over and over again of saying there's no place for the Arbitration Commission. Amongst other things, he said he would stab it in the stomach. He doesn't see a role. It's outside. He said, I'm irrevocably committed to an enterprise approach with voluntary agreements outside the reach of the Industrial Relations Commission. No Commission. Under our policy, the Act will be amended to prevent the Commission having any jurisdiction over these matters covered by voluntary agreements. He sees no arbiter in it. He sees flexibility down. He doesn't believe in compensation for penalty rates. He makes that very clear in a number of statements he's made about this. But what is he saying, Mr Speaker? What's he saying now? He's out there trying to say our policies are the same as the government.
And the member for Gippsland.
We believe that there should be a no disadvantage test of some kind. We will have certain minima. We will have the Commission. We'll still have a role for the Commission and all this. Mr Speaker, someone who's committed to savage cuts in the works of all Australians who believe in all these things, Mr Speaker.
Order. Those on my left.
He believes in all these things, but now he's trying to say, Mr Speaker, that I know he's really got a cuddly-wuddly IR policy. He really believes it's the same as the government's. In other words, on the big thing he staked his whole career on, the great reform, as he calls, of industrial relations, the importance of radical labour market reform, where is he? He's now trying to wimp away to a policy which he's always regarded as wimpish, and that's, of course, the government's policy of protection for people who are disadvantaged and low paid. So on fiscal policy, he stands for nothing. On fiscal policy, Mr Speaker, he stands for nothing. On industrial relations policy, as the weight goes on, he's moving back nearer to the government's policy. And what I've said to the Australian people, don't believe him. Don't believe him. All he wants to do is to get into office and say, you know what the players are, you know who the team is, you know what who the players are, you know what the team is. He said over time, having laid out an industrial relations policy over such a long period of time, is that if I win the election, nobody can deny I have a mandate to change industrial relations. So I say to the Australian people, don't believe him. He's weak and he's sneaky, and don't believe him. Now, Mr Speaker, Mr. Speaker, he's weak and he's sneaky and don't believe him.
Order.
Now, Mr. Speaker...
Prime Minister, just wait. I remind you again of Standing Order 55.
Now, Mr. Speaker, this is the same person
Member
who
for
said
O'Connor.
Medicare is a failure in his 87 policy document. We will end bulk billing, which produces a scandalous waste of money.
Order!
Medicare is an administrative quagmire, a financial monster and a human nightmare. This is what he said about Medicare. In the fight-back policy, he's changed
I
to
warn the
include
member for Kennedy.
Medicare for pensioners and card holders only, bulk billing abolished for Medicare except for welfare recipients, and that was only 3 years ago.
And I warn the member for O'Connor.
Mr. Speaker, here's his policy launch, allowing opting out of the Medicare arrangements, abolishing bulk billing. Medicare is a failure, he says, in his 87 policy launch. Then he said, we'll pull it right apart. The second thing we'll do is get rid of bulk billing. It's an absolute rot. Yes, he said, the best we can, we'll go completely back, but I'd love to go right back. Mr. Speaker, and now he says he believes in Medicare. Now he believes in bulk billing. After all of these years, Mr. Speaker, he's weak and sneaky and the public shouldn't believe him. Mr. Speaker, on these big policies, Mr. Speaker, you see, the problem about John Howard, he's missed the whole message with the contract with America. At least Newt Gingrich put his program down and got his majority elected on it. You have no program down. You are now walking away from your program, yet you want to claim a mandate on the basis of the fact you know the team and you know what they'll do. Not a mandate on what you're now saying, but what you've said in the past. And what you've said in the past is that you'll make massive cuts to government spending, you'll cut the heart out of Medicare, and you'll cut the wages of working Australians as you push them back to individual contracts. So, Mr. Speaker, this is where the great, brave John Howard's finally ended up, a parliamentary and policy whip, trying to sneak his way through to polling day so the public won't notice that he's really got the same draconian policies he's always had. Instead of standing up and saying, if I believe that we ought to have radical change to the labour market and I'll stake my political career on it, he wants to get it by stealth. He wants to sneak there and take them from them after he's elected to office. Instead of saying, I don't believe in Medicare, I don't believe in the concept of universality, and standing on it and seeing how he goes in the marketplace, he wants to pretend he supports it when he doesn't. And instead of saying that he actually doesn't believe in the Commission, that he doesn't believe in a no disadvantage test, that he doesn't believe in the no disadvantage test, that he believes in flexibility upwards and outwards, but in reality flexibility down, instead of saying these things, knowing they will be unpalatable, he won't say them, and so he seeks to go to a poll without a mandate. He finishes the year having walked past the parliamentary press gallery of slipping and sliding with basically slippery words through television and radio interviews over the year. He's come to the end of the parliamentary year without credibility, without integrity, without honesty, and without a mandate. That's where he's finally ended up, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, how does he go out, how does he start his censure motion, pointing to the members opposite he says won't be here after the election? I could do the same with the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 sitting members who were over there before the last election, who are not there now. Right. Mr. Speaker, after huffing and puffing to censure the government, what did he come up with? One of the weakest performances I've seen in a censure motion in all the years I've been here. Mr. Speaker, I swear blind I'll have to prop him up to keep him as an opponent before polling day. Mr. Speaker, I'll have to put splints on him. I'll have to get the splints on him to keep him in the straight. Because I swear blind, Mr. Speaker, he's going to die on me. He's like, the last guy died on me in the last 10 days of the campaign. You know, Labor's got to go. I said, sure, Labor's got to go, sure. And we saw the big rally at the Circular Quay, and I thought, this is right in the bag, right in the bag. I said to my wife, this thing is won. Now, Mr. Speaker, what we're seeing now from this fellow is he won't even stand where Houston stood with some decent policies. He wants to pretend he's got policies and then claim them out. He stands condemned in the terms I moved the amendment in.
Has concluded. The Honourable Deputy Leader of the Opposition.